I don't remember the story that Nietzsche had wrote some years ago, so I'm just gonna wing it. So I suppose the story is that, you're born and there is this innocence that you have which slowly gets taken away from you for all the right reasons, of course. And I suppose this innocence, in the Gurdjieffian sense, it would be your essence. And in your innocence and in your essence, there is no shame, there is no guilt, and everything is so organic. You cry for the right reasons and you scream for the right reasons. And your imagination is so fertile, that you don't need anything to distract you. You can just look up there to your sides and you can just entertain yourself for an hour. There is such independence, I mean, it's all stemming from naivete, that it's just what infants do without really knowing what they do. Then socialization and inculturation begins. Your parents and their notions of do's and don'ts. You open the front door as we did, and you see your friends having bicycles, but you don't. You go to other streets, it's paved, but ours is just dirt. And I remember we didn't have a TV, but one of our friends did. And one day he said, let's go to my house and we can watch, this cartoon. We said, okay. It was Aquaman. It had just come from America to Iran. And it was such a fantastic, 20-minute cartoon show. And then I remember going home asking my father if we're going to get a TV. It wasn't so much about playing soccer in the streets anymore, but... And then my brother was very studious, very disciplined, very responsible. And I was just aloof. And so they made me feel bad for the sort of person that I was. And it did impact me, I always compared myself to my brother and how sufficient he was and how proficient he was in so many things. And then you go to school and you get like an F on your essay, and you go to these wastelands, where we used to live in Iran, and you grab a red pen and you try to make the F into a B, so when you go home and you show it to your parents, instead of them slapping you because you failed, a class or an essay, they would give you some cookies because it wasn't an F. You surprise them with a B, but they would usually find out. And so little by little, your innocence goes away. Everything has a proper place. Everything you say must be in a certain way. And so you become, as Nietzsche would say, you become a camel. Your parents put things on you, and that's your burden. Then you have friends, and without really knowing, you compete with them, and that burdens you. You go to school, and that burdens you. You change physically and hormonally, and that's another burden. There is so much that, you and I carry, and I don't know what happens to our innocence or our soul or our essence, but they just get covered up, little by little, without really us knowing. But then there are these moments, where you just kind of wake up depressed, and I don't know how it happens, or, you watch a sad movie, and even though your life is filled with privilege, you want to make sense of all the things that you have, and it doesn't make any sense. Just kind of look at everything as a waste. And really, for that particular moment, you kind of live the Socratic motto that the unexamined life is not worth living. That you really, in that moment, you examine everything, your relationships, and what you're doing with yourself, what you're doing with your time, with your youth, and That's all you can do. You can examine it, and upon examining things, everything falls apart, but you can't fill it with anything. You just don't have the tools. You don't even know what you're looking for. All you know is that, you know, if kids have a sense of awe and wonder, but they exercise it without any loss, as adults, the moment you exercise awe and wonder, you know, all rooted in that particular moment of innocence, where you have no shame in asking questions, you have no shame in really just intellectually and emotionally being naked, and going to your husband or going to your wife or going to your friends or raising your hand in a classroom and asking the most innocent of questions, like, what are we doing here? You know, like, why are we married? Why did we have kids? I'm really an awful parent, you know. And you're not doing it in a mean-spirited way. It's just a moment of emptiness where innocence comes up, and you know, you just ask questions. But it's too much. It's too much. Your companion assumes that just because you're asking, it means that you want to leave them. Your kids imagine that you don't love them. If, I suppose, there's a God, and if you were to knock on his door and say, do you really exist? God would probably assume that you have lost your faith. And maybe you have for a couple of minutes, but you know, as adults, when you ask those questions, you lose everything that you had built for yourself up to that point, and it's devastating. And so there is, I think, something about our organism. If you ask these questions in an untimely way, it kind of shuts down and forces you to forget, or at least become slowly numb. You know, and then you are kind of embarrassed or ashamed because you asked your companion a question that was rooted in really honesty, sincerity, innocence. But you bow your head, you go to them and you say, I'm really sorry, I didn't really mean anything by it. And then you just cover yourself up. You know, but these moments usually happen in life by life. Sometimes your own psyche just empties itself for a few minutes. But for the most part, you go back to being who we've always been. You're just a camel. And there is nothing wrong with carrying other people's nonsense, societies, culture, religion, all the teachers out there. Because it is valuable to conform. It is valuable to follow. You know, it's like your GPS to life. Just doing things on your own is way, way, way too difficult. You know, so you kind of just build on what others have done in the past. You know, I don't want to go into a cave to figure out who I am, what I am. I just read the Quran, I have faith in Muhammad or the Buddha or Jesus, and I say, okay, well, what they said must have been true or must be accurate or whatever, and I become a Christian or a Muslim and I go to a church or a mosque. Then, you know, something happens. I think there has to be something, and I think it's for the most part invisible. I don't want to sound hippie-ish, but it's like this back and forth energy that takes place with when someone who has something and someone who is seeking something. And I don't know what it is. I mean, different traditions call it different things. You know, it's like, if I was to go to Hinduism, it's like there is this coiled up energy in your Kundalini center, you know. It's psychic, it's filled with tension and conflict. And upon meeting someone, you know, it kind of just comes to life like a serpent that just rises up. At a certain point, this camel who has been conditioned to carry a culture that's many thousands of years old, a religion that's many thousand years old, social rituals and etiquettes that's hundreds if not thousands of years old, that all of them live inside us. I mean, I remember one day I was so frustrated. with all of the stuff, and it was Ramadan, the fasting month, that I just sat in the Quran. I put my behind in the Quran, and my mom screamed and my dad yelled. Because for them the Quran made sense. For them the fasting month made sense, Ramadan. For them the Quran was not just, ink on paper, it was a sacred text. For me, it meant nothing. It couldn't offer me anything, And I desperately wanted something to give me meaning, but nothing would. And, I look at this book and I say, they say it's sacred. They say it was, revelations given to Muhammad by God. And yet it does nothing for me. And so at a certain point, I suppose, you as a camel kind of look at all the things you've been carrying for all these years. And you say, you know what, I'm just going to bend my knees. And I'm going to sit. And I'm going to wiggle a little. And I'm going to throw all these bags on the ground. And I'm going to stand up and I'm going to walk naked, walk free. So whenever you encounter someone with whom you have a connection, and I'm not talking about like a romantic kind, I'm talking about, for some strange reason, you just feel someone's presence without them opening their mouth to say a couple of things, or you actually do hear them talk and something about you moves. So before you can actually become a student to anyone, I think there is a place in us that longs for something, and I don't know what that is. I think if Hafiz is right that human beings are like tulips, and right at the very center of their being, it's something dark. It's a dark spot. And for Hafiz, it's right at the very center of your heart, because God placed his finger on it and burned it and said, nothing in the physical world will ever satisfy you, because through my finger I have burnt your heart, so that you could always have this longing, and this longing can only be satisfied by me and through me. I suppose it's a nice, creative, poetic way of describing the kind of difficulty that we as human beings have, that at a certain point you realize everything you have done in your life is not enough and you want more, but you just don't know what it is. Okay. Now, all you have is moments of intimations that something about you is just off. And it doesn't really matter how accomplished you are in your physical life. So up to this point, you're just a regular human being, like a camel. You walk around, you carry all the things that others have placed on you, including culture and society and your parents and those other folks. And once in a while you have mood swings where nothing makes any sense. But you're not a student. You're just, someone who has, once in a while, an opening, sees something, you realize it's far too burdensome, and you don't really know how to keep that spark alive that tells you that, you're a complete waste of a life. So having that, and all the things that are placed on you, is what we call personality, something that Irina Tweedy just talked about. That here you have your essence or your soul, and here you have, after all these years of living in society and having all these desires and being in environments where things are just being advertised to your senses, little by little the essence gets covered up. And then you have a name, Amir Sabzvari, and then you ridiculously give yourself a title, I'm a professor of philosophy. And then you read all this nonsensical books and all these ideas get in your head, and the assumption is, just because I have some ideas, just because I think some thoughts, these ideas are mine and I actually do understand them. And then you have your own pathetic little life experiences, which just gets your personality even thicker. And we are immensely cunning animals, in the sense that even though we function mainly through all the masks that we wear, unknowingly for the most part, we assume that these masks are really our souls, that our poetry comes from our soul, that our talks, whatever they may be, they also are generated from our souls. In other words, we are created because our soul is alive. But these are just the bags that have been put on us. And I think we're just desperate for a part of us to kind of come to life. And so all human beings have the potential to become a student. But all human beings come with all sorts of bags on them, despite having potentials, despite having moments of emptiness and innocence and sincerity. We all get covered up. So sometimes your encounter with a teacher who is going to, I suppose, train you on the spiritual quest, sometimes it could be immediate, sometimes it could be gradual. The problem with this immediate sense of attraction to a teacher, what it fails to do for you, I think sometimes, is it fails to generate doubt. Because you need doubt, you need the conflict. You need to go to the teacher, stay with him or her, and then leave. Go back to life. And in that way, you are tested. Life tests you. Your teacher tests you. And you kind of understand the worth of your own salt. Unless you happen just to be at the right place in life where you meet someone and within like an hour or two or a week, you just recognize that they are in fact the person that you're supposed to be with. They have things to teach you. And it's what happened with Hussein and Hussein, the two Husseins, that it was just the second or the third or the fourth meeting that he just heard this noise inside his head, follow this man. He didn't need the doubts. He was already like a 40-year-old man whose life was physical life, but just very chaotic. And that's another factor, if your life is full and it's rich and you're content, you're going to be far more attached to your physical life. You're going to be attached to your companion, you're going to be attached to your kids, you're going to be attached to your job, all the psychological narratives. If on the other hand your life is chaotic, things about you are broken already, and you just want someone to kind of give meaning to that brokenness. Life has nothing to offer you. Every time you go home, you have a disagreement that turns into like a screaming fight with your companion. And then your entire life is under an avalanche of questions, and you want to leave your life, but you can't. And so you're just ready for someone to come into your life and say, your life sucks, but I can offer you a different life, but you don't really need to leave the life that you have created thus far. If you have a life that is, again, a life that you're comfortable with, it's going to be really, really, really difficult. Because if your life is broken, the sort of guilt you're going to feel is not going to be as intense. If on the other hand you have a good marriage, or your life is relatively healthy and comfortable, every time you want to walk away from your life, you have to figure out what you're going to tell your companion. You got to figure out what to tell your kids. You have to figure out what to do with God, what you're going to tell God, what you're going to tell your parents, what you're going to tell yourself. So the amount of guilt and shame and resistance and conflict that's going to be inside you is just tremendous, Now, one of the ways that a person who has a relatively rich life, comfortable life, can little by little find him or herself okay with walking away is دزدیده چون جان میروی اندر میان جان من. Your life is good, but the teacher you've encountered is like a thief at night. You're not even aware, but little by little, just the way they sit, the way they eat, the way they talk, their body language. It just goes inside you, and the more interaction you have with this person, you realize that they occupy more and more space. So then, besides the immediate attraction, there is the gradual attraction, which is, you encounter someone, they're okay. You don't really find them that interesting initially, and little by little, sometimes it takes 5 months, sometimes it takes 2 years, but something about you, forces you to keep in touch with this person. And, just because you go to his or her gatherings, it doesn't mean you're going to accept everything that this person says. You're probably going to take in 5% of everything, and you're going to say 95% is just junk. Because there is no relationship. And if you don't have a relationship, you don't really respect. Sometimes you can respect someone without loving them, and sometimes you respect them because you love them. But you're not there yet. All you know is that, this person has some interesting things to say. Now, whenever you encounter students, what usually you encounter is most of who and what they are has roots in their physical life experiences. The problem with spiritual teachers is that the spirit has a tendency of rejecting everything that's physical. That you can be married to your wife and you can be married to your husband, but you must also be married to your teacher, and that marriage is going to have a different quality. You're going to have conversations with your friends, but your conversation with your teacher is going to be very, very different. And part of the difficulty is that, and that also depends on the teacher, that who he or she is, what he or she is advertising, how potent those pieces of advertisements are. Before the teacher has any power to empty you of all the things you've accumulated over the past many, many years, what you need to understand is, as the sort of camels that we are, your marriage allows you to assume the identity of a wife. That's meaningful, that you're a professor, that's also meaningful. You're a mother, you're a daughter, you're a friend. And these are just ropes we hang on to because they do give us identity and meaning and value. Add to it the fact that life is burdensome. And from the moment you wake up, you try to wrestle with all the problems that life throws at you. And so, inasmuch as I suppose none of us may desire some of the things that exist in our physical life, the truth is most of the emotions that live inside us, mostly negative, they are rooted in the physical everyday experience. Most of our angers and disappointments and hopes and dreams have to do with our physical body in the midst of a physical world. And so, if you have a very intense relationship with your physical life, and there is nothing wrong with that, the longing that lives inside your essence is always there. Once in a while it just pushes its head, out of your physical life and says, "You have forgotten me, I'm just here to remind you." And then it goes back down, making you feel guilty for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you have a teacher like Moses, he's going to have you fight for those who don't have much. Someone like a Moses is not going to invite you to find the kingdom of God within. If that is the spiritual quest you're looking for, Moses is not about that. Moses is about social justice and fairness. Moses is about removing slavery, making sure that society doesn't hold anyone hostage for any wrong reasons. So Moses connects you back to your physical life. Jesus, on the other hand, he does something. People like Jesus, who don't have a house, who don't have mortgages, who don't have a wife, who don't have kids, who after 18 long years of not being around, all of a sudden appear, don't even go to their mother and say, hello, I'm your son, nothing. And if the gospel story is right, that even on the cross he looks at his mom and says, woman, not even mom, not even I'm sorry for being such a crummy son. He just says, woman, behold your son. And, John is standing next to her. If you're talking about someone who's very, very, very detached from life, what you have are two different teachers with two very, very different sets of advertisements. And they demand different things from you. Moses would say, don't lie to your parents and to your husband and to your neighbor. Jesus demands that you don't lie to yourself. And these are very, very, very different things. Not to lie to yourself, you have to get to know yourself really, really well. And it's really dark in there. Moses, on the other hand, in as much as it's also difficult, it's much easier path to follow. So what all of us have in life is assumptions, attachments, emotions, all connected to our physical life. And now you say, how does a teacher empty the student? Sometimes when Yusuf asks me for a spoon, I give him mine. He looks at the spoon and says, no, you've touched that already. I want a clean spoon. At this stage of my understanding, and I don't understand things very well, but in as much as I can, I think teachers are extremely, extremely, extremely selfish. I think whenever you want to establish a relationship with anyone, the assumption is that you have something to give. Whether we're talking about a romantic relationship. Yesterday was our New Year, or a couple of days ago, and my mom had invited this person. And in the 2, 3, 4 hours that we were there, he was trying to dominate the conversation, which was okay. He was like an 80-year-old man. There was something about him that screamed, I think I know what I'm talking about. And I look at the rest of you and I categorize all of you as idiots. Listen to me. Given that we're all selfish and teachers are no exempt from this, and given that teachers don't really enjoy when their ideas are, someone gives a commentary about what they're saying. I remember Jacob Needleman some years ago when I had some conversations with him at his house. He had just finished this book called The Heart of Philosophy. Not a very good book, but as books go, it's relatively a good book. He had written this chapter in the book, and one of his friends was there. And so he said, I had spent like 5-6 months writing this chapter. So what do you think, Joe? And Joe looks at Jacob Needleman and says, well, let me tell it to you in about 5 minutes what he just said. And Needleman kind of had this grin on his face. And he said, yeah, I guess that's accurate, And here you have 6 months of a man's life reduced to 5 minutes, And the heartache is not seen. All the reflections and ideas are like puzzles, and then when you put them on a piece of paper, it becomes even more difficult. So, since teachers are selfish and they want to inject their ideas and their feelings and their task in life into the student, and the student comes with a history, what you have is, initially at least, there's going to be resistance from the student. And a good teacher with a good amount of experience that have been processed well, they're not going to be like an Eckhart Tolle, where they say, well, every perspective is right, and they're calm and serene and soft-spoken. They're just going to tell the student that the student is wrong. I mean, they're intellectually going to punish them. Whether or not the student returns, no one knows. If the interaction continues, there is a part inside the student that opens up to the teacher. In other words, and that part that opens up, it houses the presence of the teacher. And you have to wait and wait and wait and wait for, I suppose, the king of all emotions, which is called love. One of the things that love does, and it's not just the student loving the teacher, it's also the teacher loving the student. It's a two-way street, because if you love your teacher but the teacher doesn't love you back, then you're not going to get very far. If the teacher loves the student but the student doesn't love back, that's not going to go very far either. So it has to go both ways. Initially, what's going to happen is the teacher is going to love the student more than the student can realize. And it's only because the student has allowed certain parts of him or herself to be possessed by the teacher. And the teacher can see his or her own reflection inside the student. And it's not because the student understands the teacher. And the teacher doesn't really care how well the student understands, because we're not talking about an intellectual relationship. We're talking about a relationship that is really, for the most part, revolves around emotions. The intellectual relationship happens to students when the student leaves the teacher, where you go away and, like a nice honeybee, you sit somewhere and 20, 30, 40 years of your time with your teacher, you sit, and then you begin to think thoughts. Then you begin to reflect. Then you begin to make sense of all the things that he or she has said to you, all of your experiences. And then you digest what you can. And that becomes your own wisdom and your own interpretation. And then you reject the rest, or the rest doesn't even matter anymore. So if there is no emotions between the student and the teacher, it won't go very far. It's impossible. Now, with your friends, you can go to places. With your friends, you can go to coffee shops, you can sit and watch TV, you can do all sorts of things. In other words, your friends can connect you back to the physical world. With the teacher, there is nothing that you can do. What you have is just a bundle of intense feelings coming at you from all over the place. And all you do with the teacher, you just sit and you just talk, or you just sit and don't talk. And the only way that can happen is, initially you are passive to your soul and very active to your personality. It's your personality that's in the driver's seat. What the teacher does is he or she makes your personality, the desires that live inside you, the unspiritual, physical desires. The teacher has to pacify those desires, and so activate your essence or your soul. Not your reflection, just the emotions, okay? And not the emotions that connect you or have to do with your physical life. It's a set of emotions that have nothing to do with your physical life. And that's where the conflict appears. And it's going to be really, really intense. The more you like your teacher, the more intense it's going to be. And as personality becomes pacified, your essence, your soul becomes activated. And you go back into your physical life, but it doesn't have the power to touch you. And it feels as if you are in life, but you're not part of any aspect of life. Now, it's impossible to be empty without, I'm not talking about depression just yet, okay? There comes a point where you fall in love with your teacher, but you have no idea what exactly you're falling in love with Are you in love with his or her physical space, physical body, his or her eyes, lips, nose, whatever, the room, Are you in love with his or her soul, if there is such a thing? So it's really quite a kind of a mysterious thing. And your intellect comes down to figure this out, but you can't figure it out. Now, here's the difficulty. Before you can sit in your room and knock on the gates of divinity, the truth is, the initial steps are that you find yourself outside of your teacher's home and you keep banging on his or her door, because your teacher, the physical person, is the extension of the thing you're looking for, which you don't really know what it is. It's kind of like the Gospel of John, where you see me, you see God. I can't access beauty. I don't know what it is, but I watch this 20-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo play soccer, and it's amazing. It really, really is. I'm just consumed and everything else disappears in my life. He just captures me for like 5, 10, 20 minutes before Yusuf just barges in. One of the things that I think happens in the presence of a teacher is, this is after like you have emotionally fallen into this trap. I'm not talking about going there and having an intellectual conversation. There is really nothing to talk about. There are no questions to ask. All I want to do is just be there. I want to look at him or her. My own experience was that I was both full and empty when I went to Hussein's house. And when I left his house, I was both full and empty. But I couldn't find a place for myself in life. And because I don't think teachers enjoy having competition, naturally and organically they have this thing inside them called jealousy. You can't, I remember a couple of times I made the mistake of talking about Descartes or talking about some of the Sufi saints in front of Hussein. And I even remember one time telling him that I was working with Jacob Needleman some exercises, and I unknowingly told Hussein some of those things. And Hussein looks at me and says, I've known this for many, 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 many years. And the truth is, he didn't. But he didn't enjoy me talking about Jacob Needleman. I remember even I had pictures of David Long at the car wash. And one day he comes to the car wash and says, oh, is that David Long? You framed this photo? I said, yeah. And he shook his head but didn't say anything, Because the truth is, he wanted all of my intellectual space and he wanted all of my emotional space. He wanted me all to himself. And I think all teachers desire that. It's no different really than any romantic love relationship. So, I suppose the short answer, and forgive me for rambling on, you're full of life, whether it's immediate or gradual, you fall in love, conflict begins to appear. Little by little, the object of love just grows inside you as the days go by, to the point that everything inside you is the thing you have fallen in love with. And love by its very nature pacifies you. It makes you wait, be patient. صد فصل بهار آید و بیرون ننهم گام ترسم که بیایی تو و در خانه نباشم. I shall sit in my room, the entire year. Fall comes, then spring comes, then summer comes, and winter comes. I will never leave my room because I'm waiting for this knock on the door. Love forces you to submit. There isn't much you can do. In romantic relationships, it eventually just fizzles out and you walk away. I can't say I fell in love with Hussein's soul. I don't really know what that means. All I know is that there was something about him that I really, really, really enjoyed. And it was something I was telling Sarah this morning, because we talked about Hussein during the New Year, that very much like you, I was 18. When you were younger than I wanted to play tennis or play soccer, be a musician. It all went away. I was a confused kid. Then I became a more confused kid, encountering Hussein and all the things he would say and I didn't understand. And your individuality goes away, your self goes away. I remember one day I went home and I threw away all of my music and I just picked up traditional music. The problem with, sometimes you love something, but you don't yet have it, you just love it. Sometimes you love something and you have it, and then you explore it, and then your love becomes mature in understanding as well, The problem with loving something but not yet having it is that there is so much longing and yearning that lives inside you. And there is like this empty space and nothing can fill it. And you live in anguish and you live in pain. And everything about life just tastes bitter. It's just poison. And that's the difficulty of this particular stage in love, that you have someone like Hussein, you see him every day, you enjoy what he says, you enjoy the way he makes you feel about yourself, and you enjoy the way he makes you feel about him, you enjoy the conversation, everything is beautiful. The only problem is you have a lot of feelings, you just don't understand what these feelings are about. And so you pray, but you have no idea what you're praying to. You fast, but you have no idea why you're fasting. You do all these ridiculous things. And when you laugh, you feel guilty. When you go out on a date, you feel bad because you feel as if you're betraying not just Hussein, you're betraying this passion you have for something. If you are lucky, if any student is lucky, there comes a point where little by little understanding will come. And that's the thing. You need to understand something really, really well and then express it. It's the only way you can find rest. I suppose you could call it closure. But generally speaking, today, because we knew that all of you were going to come here, we got back around midnight last night and we woke up around 6 and we started cleaning the house. Inside a student there is so much history, and the only thing that a teacher can do for the first, I suppose, many months, if not years, is to just get some sort of a vacuum and get rid of all the stuff that lives inside the student. And I think the easiest vacuum available that can kind of make this journey a bit more faster, just fall in love. Everything else disappears. It's an agonizing place for the student. And some students eventually become like, Aesop's fable, the sour grape. If you have seen that movie, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's night, and I think her name is Jane Fox, who had killed, the teacher. And I forget the guy's name, who is the hero of the movie, where the woman looks at this guy and says, your teacher had no problem sleeping with me or having sex with me. but he never gave me the secrets of Wudon. And that's the thing, you know, where the student really needs to just be patient for a long, long, long time. Be okay with all the so-called abuse and trust. And it's very, very difficult, you know. I remember I had told my grandfather and my uncle to send me some books from Iran, and eventually they arrived. It took like 4 months for them to get here. And I look at them and I say, this does not make any sense. It's like classical Persian. And lots of like Arabic words and concepts, and I didn't understand. And I said, I'm not going to waste my life, you know, trying to figure this out. So I called Hussein and said, Hussein, you know, I got these books, and can I bring them by and show them to you? And my intention wasn't really to sell them to him or give them to him. I just wanted to figure out what to do with them, how to read them and understand them. And he looks at me and says, they're not good for you. Give them to me. And he said, I'll buy them from you. And what can you say? I'm not going to say no. So I said, okay, you know. And then he says, okay. So he goes to behind the counter and he gives me 2 pounds of Bulgarian cheese. And I say to him, I said, what the hell? You know, I am so upset. And, you know, after like an hour, I get back into my car and I'm using all these profanities. I'm screaming. You know, these are like books that you can't find. They're no longer printed. You know, my grandfather and my uncle had to go to these like secret places to get these books. And I just gave them away for 2 pounds of cheese. And I didn't have the courage to say, God damn it, give me my books back and shove this cheese, you know, back into the counter. You know, it took me, I can't tell you, it took me so many years. Because then we would have gatherings. I would go to his house and I would see my books right there. And I can't tell you how often I was tempted to just kind of grab them, you know, while he was like looking away, put them in my bag or, you know, run the books to the car. I felt betrayed in so many ways and exploited. And I guess I could say I didn't love enough and have faith enough, I trusted enough. But eventually I understood. And I'm glad that I kept my mouth shut.